If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, and it can be heard on Spotify, Apple, and many other platforms. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Now download the free Anchor app or go to Anchor FM to get started. That is ANCHOR.FM. Fanatics, ideologues, and absolutists are humanity's greatest scourge. Whether they're the leaders or the followers, fanatics are people who indulge in a concoction of self-affirming, know-it-all confidence that they have unique access to absolute truths so perfect that they have to impose them on everyone. Humans crave clarity. Many people join cults because they believe they're being offered solid, absolute answers for questions such as good versus evil, religion, the meaning of life, politics, and more. This is the movement of the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. Welcome back to Crime and Cryptic, where we investigate criminals, cover-ups, and all things covert. I'm your host, Haley, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive inside an infamous cult that plagued Uganda through the millennium. The movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God was a breakaway religious movement from the Roman Catholic Church, founded by Credonia Mwerinde, Joseph Kibweteere, and Bee Tait in Uganda. It was formed in the late 1980s after Mwerinde, a brewer of banana beer, and Kibweteere, a politician, claimed they had visions of the Virgin Mary. The 5 primary leaders were Joseph Kibweteere, Joseph Kasaparari, John Kamagara, Dominic Katurababo, and Credonia Mwerinde. In early 2000, followers of the religious movement perished in a devastating fire in a series of poisonings and killings that were either a group suicide or an orchestrated mass murder by group leaders after their predictions of the apocalypse failed to come about. In their coverage of the event, BBC News and the New York Times referred to the movement as a doomsday cult. First, let's examine some historical context. The recent past of Uganda has been marked with political and social turmoil. The rule of Idi Amin, the AIDS pandemic, and the Ugandan Bush War wreaked havoc across the country. People began to be pessimistic and fatalistic, and the established Roman Catholic Church was backsliding, enveloped in scandals, and the faithful were becoming dissatisfied. In this turmoil, many post-Catholic groups formed in the late 80s as a confused and traumatized populace turned to charismatic, self-declared messiahs who renounced the authority of the government and the church. Paul Ekazire, a former member, explained his motivation to join the movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments by saying, "We joined the movement as a protest against the Catholic Church. We had good intentions. The church was backsliding, the priests were covered in scandals, and the AIDS scourge was taking its toll on the faithful. The world seemed poised to the end." The goals for the restoration were to obey the 10 Commandments and preach the word of Jesus Christ. They taught that to avoid damnation in the apocalypse, one had to strictly follow the commandments. The emphasis on commandments was so strong that the group discouraged talking for fear of breaking the 8th commandment, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor," and on some days communication was only conducted in sign language. I, personally, have learned some fantastic ways to roast my neighbor in sign language, but that's besides the point. Fasting was conducted regularly, and only one meal was eaten on Fridays and Mondays. Physical intimacy and sex was forbidden, as was soap. For the latter, I cannot provide any logical explanation. I assume it's connected to their firm beliefs opposing healthcare and sanitation. Movement leaders declared the apocalypse would occur on December 31st, 1999. The group had a strong emphasis on an apocalyptic end time, highlighted by their booklet, A Timely Message from Heaven, the End of the Present Time. They also taught the Virgin Mary had a special role in the end, and that she also communicated with their leadership. They held themselves akin to Noah's Ark, a ship of righteousness in a sea of depravity. The earliest origins of the movement have been traced back to Credonia Mwerinde's father. In 1960, he claimed to have a vision of his deceased daughter Evangelista, who told him that they would have visions of heaven. This prediction passed in 1988 when he saw Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, and Saint Joseph. His daughter Credonia also had similar visions and was involved in a virgin cult. In 1989, Kashaku instructed her to spread the message across Uganda on the orders of the Virgin Mary. In that year, she would meet Joseph Kibweteere and tell him of their communications. Joseph claimed to have had a vision of the Virgin Mary in 1984. Credonia Mwerinde also had a similar vision in a cavern near his own home in Uganda. In 1989, the two met and formed the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God, with the mission to spread the Virgin's message about the apocalypse. The group grew rapidly and also attracted several defrocked Catholic priests and nuns who worked as theologians, rationalizing messages from the leadership. Two of the arrivals were priests, Paul Ikazire and Dominic Katarababo. The sect grew in importance with the arrival of Dominic, a respected and popular priest with a PhD from a university in the United States. In order to obtain more funds for the increasing number of disciples, Kibweteere sold his 3 other properties, cars and milling machines. Some reports also conclude that they were involved in human trafficking in order to raise funds. By the late 1990s, the church had grown into a thriving community set in pineapple and banana plantations. Members lived communally on lands bought by pooling the profits from their property, which they sold when they joined the movement. Mwerinde claimed to receive messages from the Virgin Mary through a hidden telephone system that communicated through everyday objects. In western Uganda, they built houses for recruitment, indoctrination, and worship, and a primary school. The year 2000 was settled on as the final, compelling date for the sect's predictions of the apocalypse. In 1992, the group was ordered out of Washamere by village elders and moved to the Kanangu district, where Mwirinde's father offered an extensive property for their use. In 1994, Paul Ikazire left the sect, taking with him approximately 70 members. By 1997, according to a filing with the government, the movement's membership was listed at nearly 5,000 people. In 1998, the Ugandan press reported that the movement had been shut down for unsanitary conditions, use of child labor, and possibly kidnapping children, but the sect was allowed to reopen by the government. As the new millennium approached, preparations for the end mounted. In 1999, the state-owned New Vision newspaper ran an interview with a teenage member. He said, quote, "The world ends next year. There is no time to waste. Some of our leaders talk directly to God. Any minute from now, when the end comes, every believer who will be at the spot will be saved." With the new year looming, activity by the movement members became frenzied. Their leaders urged them to confess their sins in preparation for the end. Clothes and cattle were sold cheaply, past members were re-recruited, and all work in the field ceased. January 1st, 2000 passed without the advent of the apocalypse, and the movement began to unravel. Questions were asked of Mwerinde, now nicknamed the Priestess of Death, and Kibweteere, and payments to the church decreased dramatically. Ugandan police believe that some members, who were required to sell their possessions and turn over the money to the movement, rebelled and demanded the return of their money. It is believed that events that followed were orchestrated by sect leaders in response to the crisis in the ranks. Another date was immediately predicted. March 17, 2000 was the new end of the world, a doomsday they said would come with ceremony and finality, according to the New York Times. The movement held a huge party at Kanungu and roasted 3 bulls and drank 70 crates of soft drinks. On the 17th, group members arrived at the church in Kanungu to pray and sing. Minutes later, nearby villagers heard an explosion, and the building was gutted in an intense fire that killed all 530 in attendance, including dozens of children. The windows and doors of the building had been boarded up. The 5 principal cult leaders, Joseph Kibweteere, Joseph Kibweteere, John Kamagara, Dominic Katarababo, and Credonia Mwerinde, were assumed to have died in the fire. The fire alerted the Ugandan authorities to what had actually been occurring in the movement. Several days before the movement leader, Dominic Katarababo, was seen buying 50 liters of sulfuric acid, which may have started the fire. Another party was planned for the 18th, which officials believe sect leaders had announced in order to mislead authorities as to their plans. Police investigated movement properties and discovered hundreds of bodies at sites across southern Uganda. 6 bodies were discovered sealed in the latrine at the Kanungu compound, as well as 153 bodies at a compound in Buhang. Now, there are 150 bodies at Dominic Katarababo's estate in Rangazi, where they had been poisoned and stabbed, and another 81 bodies lay at leader Joseph's farm. Forensic investigations indicated that they had been murdered weeks before the church inferno. When the time came for the final massacre, cult members were in no condition to resist. Their daily routine was arduous. They were awakened at 3 o'clock every morning for 2 hours of prayer. They fasted for 2 days a week, and on the other 5 days, they were fed next to nothing. When their children, desperate for hunger, were punished for catching and eating insects, they acquiesced. And when they were infested with scabies, they didn't complain. Followers had sworn absolute poverty, chastity, and obedience. They slept on the floor, washed with coarse laundry soap, and observed strict silence at all times. They were never allowed to speak to their immediate superiors, much less to the 12 supreme leaders of the cult, a management structure based on the 12 apostles. Fatigue, hunger, and faith led to blind obedience. Other than the individuals who died in the fire, medical examiners determined that the majority of dead sect members had been poisoned. Early reports suggested that they had been strangled based on the presence of twisted banana fibers around their necks. After searching all sites, the police concluded that earlier estimates of nearly 1,000 dead had been exaggerated, and that the final death toll had settled at 778. After interviews and an investigation were conducted, the police ruled out a cult suicide, and instead consider it to be a mass murder conducted by movement leadership. They believed that the failure of the doomsday prophecy led to a revolt in the ranks of the sect, and the leaders set a new date with the plan to eliminate their followers. The discovery of bodies at other sites, that the church had been boarded up, the presence of incendiaries, and the possible disappearance of sect leaders all point to this theory. Additionally, witnesses said the movement leadership had never spoken of mass suicide when preparing members for the end of the world. The Ugandan government responded with condemnation. The president called the event a mass murder by these priests for monetary gain, and the vice president said, "These were callously well-orchestrated mass murders perpetuated by a network of diabolic, malevolent criminals masquerading as religious people." End quote. Although it was initially assumed that the leaders died in the fire, police now believe that Joseph Kibweteere and Credonia Mwerinde may still be alive, and they have issued an international warrant for their arrest. In the weeks that followed, police discovered 4 mass graves in the Ugandan countryside at branch compounds of the cult. In all, 979 bodies were counted, exceeding the 914 members of the Reverend Jim Jones cult who died in Jonestown, Guyana in 1978. The real death toll was certainly much higher, but the exact figure may never be known. Authorities are mystified over how Mwerinde could have managed to have so many people killed in the earlier massacres, in cult compounds across Uganda, and keep it a secret. But after the fire, one clue was found in a latrine pit next to Mwerinde's bedroom. Drawn by the stench, officials discovered the bodies of 6 burly men partly dissolved in sulfuric acid. The executioners, police theorized, who had carried out the earlier massacres. 5 had been poisoned to death, and 1 was killed by a blow to the head. Most disturbing is that were it not for the smell of rotting flesh, the murder of the last 600 cult members would have been dismissed as suicide, no investigation would have been launched, and no mass graves would have been uncovered. It would have been the perfect murder. Now, why would she have done it? Newsweek's reconstruction of Mwirinde's career suggests that early on, the woman eventually called the programmer displayed a violent streak and a fascination with destruction by fire, with a lust for money. While in her 20s, she torched the household belongings of a local health official who had rejected her romantic advances. According to a family friend, the family sent her away for treatment, and on her return, she said she had been mentally disturbed. In those years, with Uganda convulsed by the genocidal rule of Idi Amin, Mwerinde owned a bar in Kanangu. She seduced a motorist who was passing through, according to a letter written by a very close family friend. Early in the morning, people came to get beer, and they found her washing blood off the concrete. She once led followers on a punishment raid of a relative who had refused to join the cult. The group burned his banana plantation. All 3 of her brothers died off, one by one, until she was the sole owner of the land that eventually became the cult's headquarters. Poison, the same murder weapon that police now say killed most of the cult members, is suspected in those deaths. What makes people join a cult or create one? We all crave unity with one another. We are social creatures, and we need clarity and validation from one another. Cults typically reduce things to black and white. Shades of gray are not allowed. After all, if they have the ultimate truth with a capital T, then every other group must be wrong, which leads to an us versus them mentality. You're either with the group or you're an outsider. This is often an aspect of the paranoia of cult leaders too. This goes part of the way to explain how group members end up distancing themselves from family and friends. They are made to believe that outsiders, i.e. those that are not in the group, are a bad influence and are stopping them from growing, evolving, and progressing in some way. Nobody joins a cult. They are recruited into the cult. They are tricked into joining. Every cult has an outer facade that presents to the world. This might be martial arts, politics, religion, personal development, hairdressing, yoga, and a host of other things. People join to do a sport or to better their relationships or their communication, or they go to a sales training seminar. Either way, when they go along, they do learn something about the topic. They learn some new religious ideas, or they do some yoga exercises, or they learn about sales techniques. But they're also fed ideas about what the leader thinks. The leader typically has a unique twist to what he or she is teaching. They offer something special, something different that is unique to this group. And from there, the leader also begins to offer their opinions on people, relationships, the government, health, and the world in general. Those new members who are caught then decide to stay for more. But it's not really their decision. They are being fed information about the group that is not true, and they are basing their decisions on this false information. They come along to do more talks or meetings, or however the group is set up. They begin to learn about the ideas of the group. They are really being led through a process that the cult leader has set up for new members. This process includes presenting information to the new members piece by piece. Once the new member accepts one idea, the next one is introduced. When all of that is accepted, the next idea is presented, and so on. In this way, the victim believes that they are choosing to continue along the path that they are still in control. I use the word victim because they are now indoctrinated into the belief system that the cult uses without realizing it is no longer their choice. Whenever they have questions, doubts, or criticisms, the leader and the cult members have that alleviate doubts and counter these criticisms. The cult psychology of black and white thinking extends to many areas too. You are fully committed or not. You accept everything the leader says or not. Cult doctrine is considered the truth with a capital T. It covers every eventuality, and members are expected to accept it completely, even if they don't understand it. Eric Hoffer says that the best cult doctrines are unverifiable and unevaluable. This means they cannot be proven or disproved, that they have to be accepted on faith. We cannot know the exact day the world will end. The movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God taught that they knew the day and changed that day when it no longer fit their agenda. In a cult, there is no room for doubts or questions, only blind obedience. Followers can be punished, isolated, shamed, or exiled for questioning their beliefs. A fundamental aspect of cult psychology is to get the person to distrust themselves and to develop a new identity where the doctrine is the master program for all thoughts, feelings, and actions that they experience. This pseudo-identity does not need to be in the presence of the group leader to know what to do. In any given situation, the program tells them how they should act, think, or feel in order to satisfy the cult leader. This pseudo-identity was achieved by breaking down the followers' minds and depriving them of food and sleep. This pattern can be seen repeatedly through other cult groups. One reason that destructive cults seem very weird or strange is that every member seems to have common habits or mannerisms. They have their own jargon. They use their own terminology. They may dress the same. This is because the members believe that they should be modeling or copying their leader, or that the people higher up in the organization, who of course have been modeling this same leader. Obedience and loyalty are highly regarded in destructive cults, and copying the leader is a way for members to show these values. In effect, the leadership very heavily influences the decision-making of the group leaders. This takes away their free will and makes the members dependent on their leader. In contrast, the members typically believe they are freer and more independent than ever before, and that the decisions that they make are for their own good. Edgar Schein, a psychologist, described the process of coercive persuasion in a 3-stage process. First, an unfreezing of the identity, breaking down the person, changing their core beliefs and opinions on themselves through abuse. Second, the indoctrination process. And third, refreezing, which is reinforcing the new identity built around the cult's radical beliefs and practices to normalize very abnormal treatment, beliefs, and behavior. There are many techniques used in the process, which is important for us to be aware that it is a process and it occurs over time. And in the end, what remains is, for all intensive purposes, a clone of the cult leader. The cult psychology is, after all, that of the leader, and the leader typically wants people devoted to them and thinking as they do. Family and friends notice radical changes in the person, and the changes can be very difficult to undo, partially because the pseudo-identity is designed to protect itself. Who wants to be hurt again, especially after all of that abuse? Why deconstruct something that is so familiar? Arguing with reason and logic is usually hopeless and often counterproductive because it only serves to isolate the person further. Very often in destructive groups, they teach that family and friends will not understand. They are not evolved enough. They're evil. They will try to hamper the person's attempts to better themselves. Consequently, when their former community does try to intervene, the leader's warnings are confirmed. The pseudo-identity feels a need to protect itself. This led to the murder-suicide of almost 1,000 followers in Uganda, but the leaders still believed to be at large. This is the movement of the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. Thanks for listening to this episode of Crime and Cryptic. If you'd like to review source material, feel free to browse the episode description. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Crime and Cryptic. Be sure to leave a good review. It helps us provide consistent quality content. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, stay fresh.